Welcome to our explainer on Aristotle and the ultimate pursuit of human flourishing. The man who shaped Western thought for over 2,300 years. Today, we're embarking on a cinematic journey right into the mind of an absolute legend. Long before the scientific method or modern political science even existed, this one thinker laid down the tracks that human civilization would run on for millennia. So let's dive right in. Meet Aristotle. Born in 384 BC in the northern Greek city of Stagira, he wasn't just some philosopher who sat around all day pondering the cosmos. No, he was a total empirical rebel. You see, his father, Nicomachus, was actually the court physician to the king of Macedonia. And growing up in a medical household gave Aristotle this deeply scientific, observational bent of mind right from the get-go. He basically looked at the world like a biologist. To put his life into perspective, his epic journey really kicks into high gear at age 18. That's when Aristotle travels to Athens and joins the famous academy of his teacher, Plato. And he spends 20 whole years there just absorbing and debating ideas. But after Plato dies, Aristotle leaves Athens, studies a bunch of diverse political systems, and in 355 BC lands a highly prestigious gig, tutoring a young prince who you might know as Alexander the Great. Finally, he heads back to Athens to found his very own school, the Lyceum. All these travels and his close proximity to royal courts gave him unparalleled ground-level insight into how states and empires actually work in the real world. And honestly, it was through those real-world experiences that Aristotle completely broke the mold. Plato, his mentor, was a hardcore idealist. He looked up to the heavens, dreaming of these utopian republics ruled by philosopher kings. But Aristotle's philosophy, it was a grounded reaction to all of that. He looked down at the dirt. He had a profound respect for biology, history, and real-world observation. He firmly believed that if you want to understand the best way for humans to live, you don't just imagine a perfect world, you systematically observe the one you're actually standing in. So to really get Aristotle, we have to grasp his core concept of telos. In Aristotle's universe, absolutely everything has an inherent purpose or end goal. Think of a knife, for example. The telos of a knife is to cut. If it cuts well, hey, it's a good knife. Aristotle argued that human beings also have a specific natural function to fulfill. We aren't just here to randomly exist, we are designed for a purpose. Which brings us to a massive question. What exactly is the human telos? Well, according to Aristotle, it's eudaimonia. Now, this is often loosely translated as happiness, but it's so much richer than that. Eudaimonia isn't about fleeting pleasure or chasing a momentary thrill. It literally means human flourishing. It's about living excellently and fulfilling your absolute potential. Because humans possess the unique capacity for reason, our highest good is actively using our intellect and reason to live a life of moral excellence. But how do we actually become excellent in our day-to-day lives? Aristotle's answer is his famous golden mean. He observed that virtue is all about finding the perfect practical balance between two extremes of behavior. Think about it. On one extreme, you have an overabundance of confidence, which is just recklessness. On the other extreme, you have way too much fear, which is cowardice. But right in the middle, that sweet spot, that is courage. Virtue is the golden mean. Aristotle breaks down these practical balancing acts into his 4 cardinal virtues. First up is prudence, or practical wisdom, which helps us judge what is right in a very specific situation. Then there's temperance, which is self-control over our appetites, courage, which we just talked about, and justice, which means fairly giving others what they are due. And here's the real kicker. Aristotle says you aren't just born with these, they are skills. Just like you can't learn to play a musical instrument by just reading a book about it, you can only become virtuous by actually practicing virtuous habits every single day. Of course, he totally knew humans aren't perfect. And this brings us to akrasia, or weakness of the will. This is for anyone who has ever said, I am absolutely going to skip the chocolate cake today, only to find themselves inhaling that exact chocolate cake an hour later. Aristotle recognized that sometimes, despite knowing exactly what the right and virtuous choice is, we completely fail to act on it because we lack self-mastery. Becoming excellent requires actively conquering akrasia. Now, virtue doesn't just stop with you. It extends outward to how we treat others. Aristotle categorized our connections into 3 types of friendship. Hedonistic friendships are based on shared pleasure. Utilitarian friendships are based on mutual usefulness, kind of like networking. But the highest form is virtuous friendship, where individuals genuinely choose the good for one another. In fact, Aristotle argued that a broader political friendship based on virtue is the ultimate glue that holds a society together and prevents civil war. This natural drive for connection leads right into his political philosophy, which is summarized perfectly in this sweeping quote: "Man is by nature a political animal." Aristotle famously stated that anyone who can live entirely outside of a state or community must be either a wild beast or a god. Because we have the unique gift of speech to discuss justice and morality, human beings are literally designed by nature to live together in political communities. And because we have this natural drive for connection, society organically evolves in stages. It's like a progression. It starts at the foundational level with the family, which is formed to meet basic everyday needs. Then, as families unite for more varied, complex needs, the village is born. Finally, several villages unite to form the state, or the polis. The state is the ultimate community because it's large enough to be completely self-sufficient. But what is the state actually for? Aristotle makes a really profound distinction here. He argued that a government doesn't exist just to provide security, protect property, or manage trade. The state originates for the sake of basic survival, sure, but it continues to exist for the sake of the good life. For Aristotle, the highest purpose of the government is to actively cultivate virtue among its citizens, helping them achieve eudaimonia together. Now, to be completely impartial, it is essential that we look at the historical context of his era. While his philosophy unquestionably shaped the world, Aristotle was still very much a product of the unequal society of ancient Greek city-states. He argued for the existence of natural slavery, genuinely believing some people were just born to be ruled. He believed in Greek superiority over non-Greeks, and he viewed women as naturally inferior to men. These are the historical realities of his texts, and they reflect the prevailing, albeit deeply flawed, beliefs of his time. Even with those flaws, his method of study was undeniably groundbreaking. Just consider the number 158. That is the massive number of distinct real-world constitutions that Aristotle and his students empirically studied and categorized. Rather than just dreaming up one perfect system out of thin air, he mapped out what actually worked in reality. He classified governments into correct forms, which serve the common good, and deviant forms, which serve only the selfish interests of the rulers. And from this massive comparative study, he developed an enduring cornerstone of modern democracy: the rule of law. Aristotle powerfully stated that law is reason free from passion. He knew that even the absolute best rulers are prone to emotion, greed, and the temptation of power. Because of that, political power must be limited by laws, which act as an uncorrupted standard of justice, rather than relying on the emotional whims of individuals. The monumental impact of these ideas literally cannot be overstated. His masterwork, The Politics, established political science as what he called the most authoritative science of human affairs. By linking individual ethics directly to the structure of the community, Aristotle essentially provided a blueprint for how a society can be engineered to foster human flourishing. So what is his enduring legacy? Well, after the fall of empires, his works survived. They were carefully preserved and translated by brilliant Islamic scholars like Al-Farabi and Averroes. Through the Middle East, his ideas eventually flowed back into Europe, shaping medieval Christian theology and sparking the Renaissance. Now, sure, modern science eventually overturned some of his physics, like his ideas on gravity, but his foundational work in logic, comparative political science, and virtue ethics, that remains the absolute bedrock of modern civilization. Which brings us to the end of our explainer, and leaves us with a pretty provocative question for you. Aristotle believed that excellence is a habit. It's a daily practice of balancing extremes to reach your highest potential. So in a modern world that so often pushes us toward extremes, whether that's extremes of opinion, of consumption, or of emotion, how will you find your golden mean? How will you practice virtue, conquer weakness of will, and pursue your own flourishing today? Take that thought with you, and thank you so much for joining us.